view us on the camera. Most of you have been at these events before and know that communication is a challenge unless you're sitting directly facing the camera. So we'll probably, to the extent that you're engaging in conversation with us, we'll ask you to be stepping up to talk into it. But for the most part, Emily and I we'll introduce ourselves in a moment, but Emily and I will be speaking a little bit at the beginning, presenting, talking about some of the themes and ideas that we're hoping to engage you with today. We will then be having, partway through, we do want to take a break, and those of you who are in the room can see that we've set up some games around. And we want to have an opportunity to actually play some games. So this is for the online audience. In advance of that time, if you are able to, we're hoping that you will join us in playing a game online. My daughter Darcy, who you can't see, is sitting there with an extra computer, and she is going to be the online game facilitator. And we are going to be playing Hanabi in the room. Emily will do some introductions about the game earlier, so you'll have some instructions on it. But in order to be ready, online audience, could you please go to boardgamearena.com. So that's all one word, the first, boardgamearena.com. You're going to have to sign up and create a username there. Send the username to the CoRe email address, coreclinic1@gmail.com. And you will be added to a game by Pink Lima Beans. And so when we get to that point, Pink Lima Beans will add you. I will repeat those instructions as we go into the games, and at that point, everybody here will be dispersing and going into games. But if you can do that in advance, set up a username at boardgamearena.com. It'll speed things up and make it much easier when we get to that point. So a few quick things, all of our basic administrative things. For those of you who decide to go to the washroom after 5:30, you need to borrow the pass card from me. So we have our elementary school put up your hand and borrow the card before you leave the room if you go after 5:30. It's just a matter of when we lock up the elevators bank. So we've also got a couple of other things. Upcoming sessions. I wanted to make sure people knew what was coming up and that you're registering. We have the ethics session is the last session that we're going to have this year in our course series. And I'm going to invite Carrie up to talk about it. Carrie Gallant will be presenting it on November 25th. And as all of you know, I believe, it is a 2-hour session designed specifically to meet the requirements of the Law Society of BC for ethics, CPD.
Well, actually, that's what I was going to tell you about.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's partly that there is the 2-hour requirement for CPD for those of you who are collecting those credits. So this is a different structure than our normal hour and a half that we have for the CoRe Speaker Series. So it's a special length. So if you are planning on coming out, please plan those 2 hours. It's going to be highly interactive, and that includes for those of you who will be coming in through the webinar format. We'll be engaging you in some of the discussions and exercises and interactive areas there as well. So it's an opportunity to really dive into what would you do if. We don't have an opportunity very much if we're not in these kinds of regular dialogues with our peers to kind of sift through some of the more difficult and challenging areas in ethics and what would you do and what is the best, what is the most ethical thing to do in these situations. So we'll be looking at that for sure. I just want to say a very quick public service announcement. I also have a negotiation workshop. It's for those of you who do CPD credits. It's worth 14 hours of CPD credits approved by the Law Society. That's coming up November 16th and 17th, so it's a fairly quick turnaround. If you're on the Mediate BC roster, you'll hear about it on the newsletter in November. But wanted to give you some advance notice about that. If you're interested, please get in contact with me and I'll get you set up. And I hope to see you either there and on November 27th at the Ethics Workshop. 25th. Okay, I'll be there on the 25th.
Would you be? Please be there on the 25th, Garrett. Otherwise, Sharon will be doing some half-assed, made-up ethics stuff on the 25th. All right. We also this is the time of year when we also plug membership, because this is also the time when, after this session, starting November 1st, we do our deal for membership for the new year. It's the $45 to sign up between November 1st and December 31st instead of the $50 if you wait till January. And in addition, if you are a new member, you also get to attend the ethics session as part of that. So that's the plug. Definitely let others know that this is a great time to sign up if they don't have a membership already. And just as a little teaser, we have the first 3 events of the year planned for 2016. January 26th, we're doing another book club because we had too much fun with the book club. And this time we are doing an Octavia Butler book. So we'll be looking at something that is actually fledgling as the book. It was the last book she wrote before she died, and it's an outstanding contemplation of both race, gender, a variety of different topics along those lines. And it also has a wonderful, wonderful and lengthy dispute resolution process that takes place. Now, it is the dispute resolution process of an extremely odd variety of vampires that does not match normal vampire mythology. They are vampires who arrive from outer space. And it's quite a fascinating read, but it's a fantastic way to actually contemplate conflict resolution. Again, I think you'll find it an interesting read. February 16th, we're going to be doing a session focused more on mediation advocacy, but I hope of interest to mediators as well. The focus of that topic is going to be, how do you deal with the competitive approach, the more aggressive and hostile negotiators, and still maintain an interest-based approach? How do you stay collaborative in the face of some of the most competitive behaviors that we have? And that will be a panel discussion. And March 8th, Jeremy Brooks, who some of you know, is doing a special section on high-risk populations and working with people who come from high-risk areas. He has a particular specialization in street-involved youth, and so that'll be one of the areas that he talks about, but should be a really interesting contemplation in working with different populations that we don't always know enough about before we walk into the room and find that that's something that we need to know. So hopefully that'll be great. The only other things that I need to hit, sorry, and I know this is getting fairly long public service announcement here at the beginning, November 10th, Continuing Legal Education is putting on their dispute resolution conference. I'm one of the co-chairs, and one of the topics that's going to come up is going to be another game session, which happens to be more on online games. So an opportunity, if this interests you, to look at a little bit more of it, and a ton of other things. We're also looking at mentorship. We're also looking at, Sterling, who's in the audience, will be facilitating a panel on first careers in dispute resolution. Carrie's on that panel. But we've got a number of people who are talking about, Yuki will be in the diversity session, where we're looking at a variety of different types of challenges and barriers that might face people entering onto mediator rosters. Really wide range of different topics. Check it out on the CLE website. And finally, this is also in connection with that, CoRe, CLE's conference is called Share the Land. And it specifically is looking at the idea that we have a lot to share. We don't always do it very well. We don't actually always walk the talk as well in this community as possibly we want to. And so one of the ways that CoRe is trying to engage with that idea is we are putting together best tips, and we're inviting absolutely everyone to do a best tips video. What's like the one thing that was really meaningful for you that somebody told you that kind of just changed the way you thought about dispute resolution? What's something really practical? What's something that, wow, I wish I'd known that, it would have made my life so much easier if I knew how to schedule that way, or if I knew about that resource that I've never seen. Whatever it is for you, it could be just about anything. We've got about 25 of them up now on the CoRe website. They're being hosted there. And I'm hoping that everybody in this room might want to film one. And to that end, Darcy has brought her video camera, and we could just get one any time after this session is over. Maybe when we're having a game, you might want to take a moment out, film it. They're 30 seconds to 2 minutes max. With the exception of mine, I know anybody who's seen it, like, I'm sorry I went over time.
6 minutes.
Yeah, but I
counted them.
But I did have 8 different tips. So anyway, for those of you who haven't done one, and quite a few in the room have, we would love to get them from everybody. So yeah, please, 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 if you can't do them tonight, send them in to us. Again, coreclinic1@gmail.com. All right. That's more than enough conversation before we get started. we are going to be talking about culture change through collaborative gaming, learning to collaborate and compete together. And I'm going to ask Emily Martin, my colleague here, who is the one person that probably hasn't met most of the people in the room. It's a pretty cohesive little group that just walked in the door. I'm looking around going, yep, everybody kind of knows each other in this room. That might not be true online, but Emily, do you want to just do a quick introduction so people know who you are?
Okay. Hi, I'm Emily. I met a couple of you before.
Yeah.
I live in Seattle, and I work at an agency called the Public Employment Relations Commission. So we're a state agency that administers collective bargaining statutes throughout Washington state. I work as a mediator, adjudicator, which means I also do administrative law hearings, arbitrations, lots of mediation, and trainings and facilitation. So I go all around the state, and I always do collective bargaining, union management relations. They're in a dispute, and I'm always a neutral. So labor relations and the ADR world don't have a lot of connections, and I think we can learn from each other. So I like to go to ADR conferences. That's how I met Sharon. That's how I met some of you indirectly. And so when she spoke about games, I thought it sounded like fun. And I'm not a gamer, so some of you may be much better at games than me. But because of my interest in this, I went shopping. I've been playing. I've been trying to teach people, and even today during a training, I brought out Hanabi. So my experience is sort of as a non-gaming person who is trying to figure out how to make this. Is this fun? Does this work? Is it too much? Is it too easy? Is it too much like a little kid? Or is there something magic about having fun together that helps us work through conflict resolution in an interesting way?
And we'll talk about it a little bit, but Emily and I met at conferences, but where I got to know her better was when we did a game jam. And that was about 1.5 years ago. So we'll definitely talk about the game jam, but that was a very, very intensive experience, and Emily and I got to know each other much better through spending a couple of days creating our own games related to mediation with a theme of how might games actually address any of the concerns we have about conflict resolution. So let me just see how this one works. I am not a PC person. Oh, I shouldn't have to do that, should I? That's really like way more work than it should be for next. All right, I'll figure it out. It must be the other keypads.
Or the arrow.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I'll go over to the other side. It'll be fine. It'll work out. So, okay, I've thrown up some lovely slides as a starting point, and Emily and I are just going to kind of go back and forth because we haven't actually had an opportunity to meet in person and talk about how we were going to do this. That's that beautiful thing about working at a distance. However, we share a lot of ideas, and this slideshow reflects more or less the order in which we wrote a paper jointly for the ABA conference. So hopefully we still think that this is a good natural order and flow, and it will be on point. But we wanted to start with the idea that our society really, really normalizes competition, and it starts early. And I don't know, how many of you kind of look back on childhood and think of every single game you ever played as being competitive and win, 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 win. And sports, win, win, win. Sports are really good. Everybody should do them. There's all kinds of positive things. Not only that, but let's actually insist that not only do you learn all these wonderful things by participating in team sports and competing against other people, you learn how to be a good loser. Right? Like that's like the best thing you can possibly get out of life is I'm a really good loser, and I'm not a sore winner. I don't gloat too much. I know how to do that properly. Those are all these wonderful things that I still keep hearing with kids going through sports and all of the rest of that. I think you also get a sense that, hey, sports, you get all this good teamwork stuff. Okay, yeah, I know, I'm getting a good laugh over there. I can tell somebody else who played team sports, right? Yeah, sure. But by age 11 now, at the latest for most sports, you've already had to go through the competition to get onto the rep teams. So you've already had the massively hurt feelings, you didn't make it, you're actually kind of a loser now because you'll never ever play competitive sports. There's that little group of people who actually understand and believe and have parents who keep telling them people do develop at different ages, and the January kids aren't necessarily going to be the ones who are the best athletes still at 15 that they are right now because they're just bigger than the kids who were born in December. There's a whole pile of things, but those messages seem to be drop out of sports, or you're a rec player. You're not a rep player anymore because you didn't make it at that one cutoff age that was the key. There's so many of those messages, and what they lead to, I think, having coached lots of kids' sports teams, spend most of your time as a coach dealing with people wanting to be the prima donna player because you need to be the best. Your parents are cheering only if you get a goal, so you never want to play defense. Doesn't matter what the sport. Like this is applicable to most sports, right? There's a position that every kid has to play because their parents will buy them the Slurpee after the game if they get the goal, or they will whatever. It's the thing you cheer about. You only record. Oh yes, really. Just wait till your son gets a little older. It's coming. The flavor from the parents is there are things that are counted as successful. And what you end up with is, while you're talking about teamwork, and you may have coaches who really do a good job of talking about how it matters, and you know, we celebrate the person who got the assist, we celebrate the person who, you know, made the save. It feels artificial because you're in a culture where there's this one star, and that's the one who's going to advance, and rewards go to that one person. I look at this picture up on the side there of the child crying over the game, and I have a very, very sad reflection back on my exposure to games as a child. May have been more extreme than most once we got into games in my family, but I remember being taught how to play bridge when I was 6. And I was taught by my father and my grandfather. And when I didn't understand the rules of bridge rapidly enough to be competitive with them the first time around, maybe 3 hands in, they were just attacking me and making fun of me and abusing me. And I just remember being that kid. Like, it's like, I'm never playing that again. I am scarred for life, and I do not play card games. It is that, and then multi-generation games of blob with my cousins. We would travel to Osoyoos and be tormented. And I had cousins who were my mother's age. So it was not fair for me and my brother and my sister to be expected to keep up with everybody else in trump hands. But you know what? We were just tormented. We just lost everything. And it was very, very tragic. And so I actually, my daughter is nodding, I still won't play card games. I just don't like them. But that's my experience of kind of growing up, this normalization. And it's in everything. Like, it's your schoolwork. It's your, like, what is it not in?
And when I think about this, I think then about when I'm mediating. Even if people aren't playing games officially, it's not about any of this. They're playing games. They're out there to win it. You know, I mean, I did a training on how to be collaborative, and then the guys showed up with the "In It to Win It" T-shirts the next day. I mean, and if they get bored, they're going to start playing games with each other. It's like a little layers going on, and who cares about trying to solve the problem? Who's gonna win the little argument or the little tiff? People play games. We're taught to do it. We end up doing it. We do it when we're bored. And so even when we're not really doing it as adults, we're still doing it. So I think about how ingrained it is in our culture. And we mentioned the ABA thing, but last year we were preparing to do something on games. Again, I'm not a gamer, so I was scared to death. And so I was trying to figure out how to play them. And I was making people play games with me. And it was really interesting to play games with people who don't like to play games, and maybe they're not very good at playing games. And maybe the idea of a collaborative game totally blows their mind, because every game they've ever played in their entire life is to win, and that's what they like to do. And this feels really, really, really strange to change the rules on them.
Yeah. we'll see what happens here when we play collaborative games, but we've certainly both experienced people, first time collaborative game, where really the goal is we are trying to win as a team. You lose if the team doesn't win. We all win together or lose together. Even with that explained over and over and over again, it's not uncommon to have somebody get to like third, fourth round of a game. So you're in 20 minutes, half an hour into the game, and kind of go, ooh, the light bulb went off. You really mean it. We're supposed to be working together. And it's like, it just is so counterintuitive and so much part of what we've learned that it doesn't resonate. It is actually a hard thing. And, you know, and for where we're coming from is maybe that's a problem, that we have normalized it to such a degree, and maybe there's this thing that we can do to try and change that up. So I'm skipping on to the next slide, which is kind of talking about the fact that we don't just, Emily was talking about this a little bit when she was talking about, you know, when she's doing the trainings, when she's talking about conflict resolution. Even within the dispute resolution world, we still accept this normalization of competition, that is something that we do. We have some competitive language. I think it's, you know, we make fun of litigation language because it's so competitive. It has the warrior and going to battle and all of these kinds of things. And you know, you win your lawsuits, you beat raps, you crush opponents, you hire pit bull lawyers. All of that language coming out of litigation, for sure, is very competitive, has that kind of sense to it. But I don't think you do much better when we start saying it's win-win, right? Because we always pair it with it's win-win versus win-lose. We're still treating it as a competition. We're using language of winning, and we're using it as it's better than. We want to replace that win-lose. And I think if you think about a lot of the language, we do it a lot. We really do kind of still speak in the norms of competition, whether we mean to or not. I've got a couple comments over there just about in negotiation, and again, this is kind of what you were talking about anyway, but there is this sense that there's something suspect a little bit, maybe weak, maybe wimpy about trying to be a little too cooperative, a little too collaborative. Doesn't matter how much we show all of the different research that demonstrates that actually the people who get the best success for their clients as lawyers are typically using more collaborative skills, that most of the research actually demonstrates a whole variety of personality traits that are linked to rapport building and trust building, which flies completely in the face of most of the ideas of what that competitive thing looks like. And yet, socially, we think it's a little suspect. We kind of think you're trying to manipulate somebody. We'll have training sessions where people have been working at different training for a long time in the mediation world. And some of you may have seen this in different trainings or may have experienced it, where you've been talking about, you know, let's do some open questions, all the basics of active listening skills and how do we utilize them. And you're well into it, and somebody finally kind of the light bulb goes off and going, I've been manipulating. I've been thinking of every one of those tools as ways to move people to where I want them to go. And that's competitive normalization. That even when you're thinking about and over and over repeating that the mediator is neutral, that it's not my solution, that I'm trying to facilitate, I'm trying to bring out interest and let you talk about it. You're in that context, you're doing it, and that's all you're talking. Even in that context, it can be weeks and months before that light bulb goes off that, oh yeah, I actually need to take a step back and it's not manipulating to get a result anymore. It's a kind of weird thing.
Well, and I think about in my mediation culture, we're out there to get the deal. Labor relations, that's part of our job. That's part of our cultural expectation. And sometimes it's very interest-based and sometimes it's not. And sometimes that means that's how you feel like you won. Even as a mediator, that's what I'm trying to win. And I might be working against both sides on that at different times. But all of that is so normalized even from where I sit, because that's how I feel like I did a good job. Is if I can walk away with a deal in my pocket. That's sort of how I get scored in some non-official way.
Yeah, and non-official, and sometimes it feels official, because that's often how we try to market ourselves is, you know, if we're in private practice, what's our settlement rate? I mean, you know, we try to stay away from those kinds of things, but it's absolutely part of the conversation. So yeah, I think you're very right. It's mediators feel like they need to accomplish something too, and somehow that competitive thing. So competitive mindset in negotiation does some things. It actually is part of the reason that we end up with conflict in some certain types of senses. You get these behaviors like withholding information, right? You can develop the tension and mistrust purely by the nature of thinking of things as competitive. So that people growing up learning that this is the way we are, it actually informs the way we approach any kind of discussion, any kind of conflict resolution. I don't know, I made a note just, you know, to highlight that some of the cognitive biases that we as mediators learn about really directly reflect that competitive thing that we learn. Reactive devaluation, if somebody, our opponent, another nice language piece that we often talk about, we maybe say opposite, the other side, the other party, all of that othering language. But if they make the offer, if it's perceived to come from them rather than the mediator making the suggestion, we automatically assume it's a bad deal, right? Our brain actually devalues that offer relative to if we heard it from somewhere else. Similarly, negativity bias. There are just so many ways that we assume that the other person is doing something sneaky. With negativity bias, we're assuming that their motives are very suspect. Whenever they're doing something, we suspect that they're coming from a bad place. And we may give ourselves, we might do exactly the same thing, but we're doing it for good reasons. So you end up with all kinds of different filters that we bring that I think are all tied into the competitive mindset that we've developed. And this normalization, I'm calling it normalization, but it's actually more than that. We have, as a society, as a culture, created this assumption that there is a value in competition, that there is a positive, that many of the aspects of competition are actually automatically something that is good, and we don't question it. It's those assumptions that we have absorbed as part of our culture, and we actually they're invisible to us most of the time.
We had a wave this summer in Washington State public sector where there were some deals that got tougher, and there was some stuff going on that made it very competitive this summer. And it was interesting, I was at a table and one of the other side to be creative, and I'm looking at them like, they think you have a gun to their head. How are they going to be creative in this moment? And as mediators, we might try all sorts of different tactics to try to keep people human and try to keep them in that space where they can be creative, be playful, be different and think in a different mindset. But sometimes that's really hard. But sometimes some element of play is a way to keep things human. So that's one of the reasons I kind of like these ideas of thinking about games and trying to think about that metaphor, because sometimes I've started bargains with that as our icebreaker. Was, what's your favorite game growing up? And that helped people get to know each other, and then we talk about the competitive versus the cooperation, and where do we go from there?
Yeah. Which would be a great segue to our next slide, and then. But I'm feeling like we should probably just highlight that one last point on this one. It's actually one of Emily's points from our paper. I recall you added this in, and I was going, oh, that's really smart. Well, you know, I really like actually co-authoring. It's a great thing because, wow, is it a great way to kind of go, yeah, that's a really wonderful way that I'm not thinking of it as I'm writing that paragraph. Awesome. But this was one that I just particularly thought, because it hinders competition, and the notion of competition really hinders creative thinking And part of that is because it does tend to focus you. We know it focuses you on distributive thinking, on the win-lose, and you know, so we end up in monetary is all we can think about. All of a sudden we're not thinking about other things, but that's partly because we are thinking about winning. So we're thinking about what the scale is by which we can measure our wins. And it actually becomes much harder when you're competing to make that shift to, how would I know if I win? If I am giving up other things, right? I know what I can get on this, and this is how I'm measuring success. I've thought through what a success would look like, and it's on this scale. So I don't know. I thought it was an interesting observation that you made.
I forgot it.
You forgot your observation. Well, you made a good segue. So let's jump and pretend that Emily had her awesome segue into this other slide. Which is just a statement, and this is kind of the kicking off point for us talking about games more, which was why it was a great segue, because you were kind of moving into the let's talk about games, let's talk about how they play in here. I don't know how many of you know Jane McGonigal, but I would recommend her YouTube videos are awesome, but also she's got some great writing about games. She does a lot of research that tends to be on online games, which is part of the reason why people don't necessarily access her, because I find that not a large number of mediators are into online games. I don't know what that's about. I look around the room and go, yeah, it could be generational, but it's not just that, because I've read her books. But she's done some research that's actually really fascinating, and if you're interested in any of it, Darren Thompson actually is going to be talking about quite a bit of that at the CLE conference. The kinds of things about how some online first-person shooter games help you develop empathy, which is fascinating. So there's quite a few interesting things, but this is kind of just a nice statement. Competition and winning are common features of many games, but they're not defining features. And it's funny because just think about games that you've played. When you think about, and in this context, think about tabletop games, because Emily and I have kind of focused on tabletop games for today. So your board games and things. How many of them can you name that don't have winning as a feature? Yet it wouldn't be a defining feature. There's nothing that makes it. It's not a rule that a board game has to have a winner. Anybody kind of like, I'm just looking around without looking at the games that we've got set out.
I think Bananagrams, I like that one because it's like Scrabble, but and yeah, there is a winner, but it's actually, in the end, it doesn't really matter because everyone's, you know, using up.
Okay.
I don't think people know that
Yeah,
one.
we're both
Can
gonna
I
disagree.
Can I disagree? Because every
not very
time I think I
competitively.
win, and every single time I'm the fastest, and every single time I've misspelled something, and you're not allowed to fix the spelling mistake and still win. You've already lost if you thought you won.
Okay, so maybe our rules are a little looser.
Actually,
words.
No, but I will say, actually, Angela's comment is great, because that reflects different family cultures of how do you play the game. But I'm asking beyond that, because if there is a winner, my family can play the game so it is hurtful and nasty and mean, and everybody leaves crying.
Aww.
I can guarantee.
Sharon, I'm going. There's a trend going on in the Lower Mainland and other places. These large-scale games are called escape games.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had the opportunity to try my first escape game.
Do you want to step up here, though, just so
Yeah,
we can be
sure.
heard? Derek, just
Where do you want me?
especially.
Behind you? In front of you?
Right where
Okay.
Carrie stood was awesome, because that actually was.
Who am I talking to?
You're talking to that little
Okay.
camera.
Hi, camera. Yeah, escape games. So I had the opportunity to try my first escape game. It was a company called Exit in Richmond. They're right next to the Costco. I went there actually because they're a member of the Richmond Chamber of Commerce, and so am I. So they invited us all to go. So I tried it for the first time. And the game we played was I can't remember the name, but basically we had to find a downed airplane, an airliner, and recover the black box on the airliner in order to save the world from nuclear destruction. And there were about 10 of us on the team, and so I found that we all had to work together in order to solve different levels of puzzles in order to get from the passenger compartment to the cockpit to the the flight deck, and the game was structured such that you had to work together because the clues were physically spread out, and one person couldn't possibly solve them all in the time they give you. And so at the end of it, I thought, wow, this is a great trend. I mean, if all these games are if there's a trend where all these people playing these games learning how to play together and to cooperate, then perhaps it's a good development in gameplay. So so I just wanted to add that. That's an example.
And I will just add the warning that my family learned that it can become competitive if you separate into 2 rooms and then have to beat the other team.
Oh, okay.
It's still good. You still work together as a team, but man.
2 teams against each other.
Well, it happens in my family automatically. If you have too many people and you have 2 rooms, you're going to compete for who finishes first. But within the room, yes, we did. But within the room, it's an awesome thing.
Even in the game jam, I felt a bit of that, where the other team was coming up with way more games than we were, you know. And I felt a little rush of adrenaline, like we got to be more creative. We got to do this. We got to do that.
And we played that war
game. And we're playing collaborative games.
Okay, that's funny. And just in case that wasn't picked up, Wendy's talking about the game jam, which we participated in creating games, and we were in 2 groups. And I think there was a little bit of a sense of initially as we started creating games, because we created very differently. One team brainstormed crazy numbers of games, and the other team was much more focused on what are we trying to accomplish and how do we do it, and was building a single game from setting up criteria. So approached very differently, but when we reported out at the first night, it sounded like one team had like 75 games. And the other team's like, are we going fast enough? Like, are we doing enough? On the other hand, being in the 75 games one, we're sort of going, they're a lot further on in their game than we are. So it was happening both ways. And that's a fascinating reflection on, you're in a room specifically because you want to help develop something that will help us be more collaborative. And even in that context, you start feeling that sense of, I think it's worth stepping back every time you're feeling that and kind of going, wow, where's that coming from? Why do I think I have to compare myself with that other team?
It's powerful.
It's a very powerful thing. Changing nature of games. This is really what you were saying, Derek, that, you know what, there are some patterns that are changing. And we've both been exploring kind of different ways and picking up different games and trying to find more of the collaborative ones. We haven't got them all up there. We've got lots here as samples, and what we handed out is actually a list of 15 collaborative games that you might want to try. There's a lot more, and if you want to find some more board games, I just did Googles for like 10 best lists of cooperative games, and there are so many game reviewers who would produce just their own massive lists, and then they give you some reviews as well, so it's a great way to try and identify some. But we've identified some there that are just different kinds of things. So what you've got on the far side of the screen are things that do look a little bit different than what I felt were fairly typical ones. The Monopoly, the Risk, I'm sorry, I grew up with all those troubles so that you could pick fights really early and have
tried the
people
new
lose.
Monopoly?
I haven't tried the new Monopoly.
It's possible to play that collaboratively.
That's good to know. So there's a collaborative Monopoly.
Well, it's not that the game itself is collaborative, but it's possible to collaborate with other players. So it's possible that you could, you can create allies. It could still be competitive, but it's possible that you could play it collaboratively, I think.
Okay,
the rules are very different now.
Well, check it out, because one of the things I'm going to just highlight, because one of the things that I have found with a lot of the collaborative games, you ask for collaborative games in game stores, and most people in game stores don't actually get that if you have a saboteur, that's not a collaborative game. And but like there's a ton of them that are otherwise collaborative and you need to work together. But there's like a mole. There's Battlestar Galactica is a perfect example. If you watch the show, you'll understand that somebody is a Cylon, and nobody knows who the Cylon is. And that person is actually working counter to everyone else, and they win or the rest of the team wins. So there's quite a lot of those, and there's quite a lot of games that structure team versus team, which tends to be actually quite positive for the most part. Just don't put any of our family members in it; they'll be good. But it actually does work quite well. But yeah, we're looking at, and the ones we're talking about today are purely collaborative. You can't win unless the whole team works together, and you win against the game rather than against another person, another team, okay? And there's a lot of them. Those are just a few on the side, and they're ones that we've got set up here, but there's a ton, and they're really fascinating.
So, are we ready to play soon? Are we getting
We're pretty close. The only thing I thought we might talk about was maybe just online games as something that happens and then go into games.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Because I don't think anything else. What we want to do is come back as well, having had a little play of games, and we want to come back and maybe talk about ways that you can actually use games in mediation, thoughts that we've had about that, and that kind of stuff, and maybe brainstorm some stuff. So that's the only thing I was going to do was kind of move into this is just pure information. There are so many online cooperative games. It's interesting when you keep hearing all of these like social truths about all these, all these kids playing all of these online shooter games and developing, like you don't have any empathy, you don't develop any of these good skills. There's actually vast numbers of them are cooperative. So they're actually playing a different style of game than most of us grew up with, that were highly competitive. They are actually developing team skills and cooperative skills and ways to work together in many, many of these most successful and most popular games. One of the challenges with most of them is that there's a fair setup time. So you often have to set up a character in a role-playing game, for instance, and so you've got all that development stuff that has to take place. So there's a bit of investment to get into it. That said, investment to get into it probably translates into more commitment to stay in it and to develop skills, and it's fascinating how quickly people actually do get really immersed in the need to actually work together and solve problems. So that's a few of them. I included this frame, which is hard to read, I realize, but it was mostly because I just thought it captured the numbers, but I don't think you can read it. It's the cooperative page. If you search co-op on Steam, which is a platform that allows you to play games mostly for free, and a lot of people are signed up and have an account with Steam, and so you can engage with other players. If you search co-op, you get those 9, and then you get browse the other 675 cooperative games. Just to give a sense of volume of cooperative stuff that is online, it's astounding. So I think many of us who focus on tabletop games, because that's what we're used to, just aren't registering how much is going on online and the degree to which there's a huge shift. Even in many of the multiplayer games, you'll end up having a team. You can't win without forming some kind of alliance and working together and coming back over and over and over in your team pursuit. So it's quite fascinating. I think that might be one of those nice positive moments of, we might actually be changing the world a little bit just by putting everybody online. Anyway, you were going to talk about Hanabi.
It was.
Should I maybe just first repeat this information for anybody online about how to get into it so that we can play it?
Right. I think that would be good to get them started, because I don't want to talk too long, because I want the people in this room to be able to play something today. So I want to stop talking as soon as I can. But I want to introduce you guys to the game Hanabi, because people in this room might not choose this game, but this is actually a very affordable game and a pretty easy game. And it's online. So go ahead and tell our online people how to get online.
Okay, online people, if you missed it earlier, go to boardgamearena.com. Okay, so that's one word, boardgamearena.com. You need to make an account. It's very simple. You will create a username. When you have created the account, send the account name, your username, to coreclinic1@gmail.com. And you will be added to a Hanabi game once we've explained it by Pink Lima Beans. That will be the person who contacts you and says, hey, play Hanabi with me. And a space will be held for you in that game. And so you'll have a chance to play that. In the room, we'll move to some other tables and you'll kind of lose sight of us, but you'll have something to stay attached and actually be actively playing. You'll have to communicate by email though. So if you're running into challenges, keep coming back and email coreclinic1@gmail.com, and Darcy will be facilitating and monitoring the email and responding to you to help you get online.
Okay, and I just want to give the basics, the very basics. I'm not going to get into the details, partially because I am not online, so I'm not quite sure how we'll feel differently. But Hanabi is very different than maybe any other card game you've ever played, because if this is my hand, I hold it like this. I don't get to see what's on my hand. You get to see what's in my hand. I don't get to see what's in my hand. And when it's my turn, I have 3 choices. I can play a card. The goal is to make a beautiful display of fireworks together. Starting with number 1, going to number 5 of 5 different colors. So I need to put, and you only want 1 of each color, 1 of each string. So it's 1 through 5, white, green, red, all the different colors. So it's easy to start because I just need to put down, if I'm the first player, I need to put down a 1, but I don't know if I have a 1. So I could guess that this might be a 1, and I could play it, but we can only screw up a couple times and then we all lose. So I might not want to do that yet. I can throw a card away and get a new card, but we can't do that very often. So I might not want to do that yet. The third choice I have every time it's my turn, I get 3 choices. I can either play a card, I can discard a card, or I can give a piece of information. So I can look at your hand and I can tell you where one piece of information about somebody else's hand. I can tell them where all their whites are, or all their yellows are, all of whatever color. I can't just say, that one's white. I just say all of these, this one, and this one. So I can point to their hand and say which one, and pretend this is the other player now. I could say, this is your white. You have 1 white, it's this one. Or I could say, this is your pink, or this is your blue. And if there was multiple blues, I'd have to say, these 2 are your blues. Now, I'm probably going to, if I'm giving a piece of information, if I'm the first player and I'm looking at the second player, I might tell them, this is your white, because that might be good information to know. But it's actually better if I say, this one is your only number 1, because at this point, we're trying to get a number 1 down on the board. If we already had some 1s, she needs to know what color, because if she puts down another white 1, we messed up, and we're going to only have so many messed ups. So you can either say all of what color or all of what number, but that's the kind of information you can share. The problem is you don't get to remember, and you discard, you pick up cards, and you forget what you have, and you reshuffle. Oh no, somebody told me something, it was important, I'm not sure what it is. So you have to think about what order you're giving information to, and how did you receive that information, and what kind of information does the players around the table need to have, because you think they might know that this is their white, and now you're pointing to them and saying this is your 1, and that might be the key, but they might forget the piece of information before because they forgot it was important. So the game takes a while to get going, but once it gets going, it's a different kind of framework because you're working together, sort of all blindly, not able to give all the complete information, but sharing enough information to try to do the fireworks together. It's not easy. You might not get it done. You might blow everything up. Kaboom, you lose. Everyone loses together. You might run out of cards, and then you can score how well you did, or you might finish, and that's the great hurrah, you got it done. And it's supposed to be hard.
And maybe we should just mention what we've got out, because we're going to invite people to choose a game to play. Some of them we probably won't get through more than a couple rounds to get a flavor of, but it's probably worth knowing what we have. I think we've got Forbidden Desert out, is that right?
We started putting Forbidden Desert out. It's about halfway set up, but not completely. Pandemic is where I started, because that's the granddaddy of collaborative games. If you go to the game store and you say, I want to try a collaborative board game, they'll point you to that one. It costs about $40. This costs about $12. So it's more elaborate, it's more fun, it's more everything. We won't finish it today. And we got a couple different board games around if we wanted to start more than one, but I wanted everybody to see it, so we set that up to start. You are working together to save the world from disease. So high stakes if you get it wrong. and you learn a little about geography because there's some cities that maybe you don't know, you don't use every day, but all of a sudden they're really important because they're on the pandemic game board. The second one I chose was Castle Panic, and I chose this as a non-gamer. It's actually, some people might think it's boring, but it was easier when I had to figure out how to teach my coworkers how to play games with other people. And I had a very short window, and I knew I was going to work with a lot of people who haven't played board games in a really long time. And it's goblins and castles, and guys like that. So in my world, I thought, okay, a game that maybe some guys might be actually interested in, that wasn't too hard and didn't require a whole lot of gaming experience. Not because I'm not that sophisticated as a gamer. So we tried that, and we thought, oh wow, what if we did that at a labor management committee meeting? Like, we offered to do that because it's not as complicated. So that's why I brought it up, because it's not super complicated. Forbidden Desert is a version like Pandemic in a lot of ways. It's tile, not boards, and so it has a lot of the similar features. I think it's the same author as as Pandemic. It's more for kids. Pandemic's more, not that it's racy, but Pandemic is just more complicated. I think more geared to older people.
Yeah, I've played it with younger children with Pandemic, but they definitely need a lot more support in the game. And so you end up having kind of this issue that you sometimes get with collaborative games of that alpha player who takes over and starts directing everybody. And Pandemic, I would say that's probably the biggest problem with Pandemic, is that the person who's teaching it to everybody else has a tendency to, the first time you play it, do a lot of direction. Like, no, you should really do this. And that's actually at our game jam, our group was specifically trying to create a game where you couldn't have an alpha player. That was our goal, was something where you wouldn't have that boss. Pandemic does that. That's probably its biggest flaw as a game. I love the game. I think it's fantastic, but you do have to consciously give information rather than advice, which is kind of a useful thing to keep practicing anyway, right? Like, you know, things you might want to think about as opposed to do that.
Training mediators.
Yeah, I think it probably is. She probably, yeah, it's actually hard.
Away from the advice giving.
Yeah, Forbidden Desert and Forbidden Island are really quite similar, and I have, with like 8 and 9-year-olds, they're great at it. Occasionally they get a little bossy at that, but it's much more child friendly because it doesn't require that same level of help you through it. Yeah.
I think Sharon has a box of other games next to her, and I have a box of other games next to me. So maybe as you get going, we'll take our boxes and put them on the table and open them up, because the boxes aren't that exciting if they're closed. So if you want to see them, if you want to hear about them, I think we have a little bit of show and tell we can do as well.
Yeah, lots of them. They're set up here. But what we'd love to do is invite people to, maybe we've got kind of enough for 4 games to try if we've got the Hanabi out. And we've got each of those, and maybe if people just want to pick something to sit down at, instructions are with them, and we'll also circulate. And for the online folks, this is the time when Darcy will open up an online Hanabi. Sorry you don't get to choose what game you play, but we had to find something that was free and really easy to sign into, and Hanabi came up quickly.
Let's play. I have extra instructions printed out, so that's why we have so many, because I figured if we can't circulate and everybody has a copy of the instructions, maybe that would make things easier. So go figure out what you want to play.
Yeah, get yourselves around a board and we'll walk around to see what we can help with.
And now, I'm going to introduce myself.
Yeah, the fact that
This one is really fun. I just got
Hello,
today. So
I'm Darcy, and I am trying to get
over and see if anyone will want to
in contact with anyone who is still online and hoping to play with me. So if you have not already, please go on to boardgamearena.com, get yourself an account. I know I've had emails from one person who is having some trouble actually accessing his account. So if you're having problems, email me as well, coreclinic1@gmail.com. And otherwise, I will sit here and wait. So I'm going to stop the live stream now so that I can keep monitoring the emails. So contact me there. Thank you.
I want to get you going.